Okay, we'll call to order this meeting of the Easton Reading Region 9 Joint Policy Committee at 9:02 a.m. on March 11th, 2022. Members in attendance, John Stinson and Chris Parkin.
And I will call into order the Region 9 Policy Committee special meeting on March 11th at 9:02 a.m. Members in attendance, Sarah Lieberger, Kathy Thompson, and Cheryl Graziano.
Awesome. I think that will take us to our first item here, the approval of minutes from our March 4th, 2022 Policy Committee meeting. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you, Chris. Do you want to make the same motion, Sarah?
I have a motion to approve the minutes for Region 9.
Second.
Good. Any discussion? Okay. Absent objection for the Joint Policy Committee, we will consider those approved.
Absent objection for Region 9, we will consider those minutes approved as well.
Very good. That will take us to public comment. No members of the public being present. That takes us to committee member comment. Hearing none, we'll move to discussion and possible action. We have our process for review and model policy. So I have some stuff I'd love to share, just some of the sort of investigation and sort of drilling in on these things. I really love this work. I know that's like the nerdiest thing that anyone could ever say, but I really so let me share my screen real quick.
John, if it makes you feel any better, I love the spreadsheet. So that sounds even nerdier than what you just said.
No, well, that's the thing that really brought joy is that
because we're recorded, I'll mention that John also noted out watching court proceedings this week. So
I did. It was my first time. I didn't know that was a thing, and I've decided that that's what I'm going to dedicate my life to, is just watching YouTube court proceedings. Okay, so a lot of things going on the spreadsheet, and I hope, can people read that? I know I probably have a pretty wide screen here. Is everyone seeing the spreadsheet right now on the screen? Yes. Okay. Are you able to make out what's there, or do I need to zoom in or sort of reformat it all? Good. Okay. So this is what I would say. We'll probably use this workbook, is I called Policy Review 2022, is what we can use to kind of organize our efforts. I added some columns here. So obviously last week we had the recommendation, and we had this sort of spot where we thought, we can use this to say adopt, repeal, maintain, according to the rubric that Dr. McKinnon suggested. We have our sort of what series is the policy a part of? What is the policy? How many pages? So I had all that last week, but we actually didn't have the details in any of this because we didn't have the policies yet. We were able to get the policies from Shipman Goodwin, and it was a login that was provided to a sort of policy portal. And the idea is you permission one or two folks on your board or in the administration to go sort of get those policies, and then sort of they bring them back and they sort of have these discussions. So we sort of I went in and I downloaded all of the policies. Took a little bit of time, but it was actually pretty easy to navigate. Put them in the Google Drive so that we can all see them. Went through each one of the policies and just looked at how many pages each one was, so that we could get a handle on like how long is this process going to take.
And that's policy plus regulation, right?
And that's one of the things that I wanted to touch on. Is some of these policies are pure policy, some of these policies are policy plus regulation, and I think it's something we need to discuss as in terms of our process, whether or not we want to take sort of the documents as they stand today, whether they do or don't include regulation, or we want to say we're only looking at the policy section. The regulation and forms, that's for the administration to handle. So that's an open topic that I think would be good for us to talk about. What I think we were sort of meant to try out just to get a sense of how this, how this process could go, is just looking at those first 6 policies. I found it to be extremely easy to get through. As someone who's read a lot of CABE policy, it's night and day. I don't know if Chris agrees, but it was so much easier to read these policies. They were more concise. They made more sense. I definitely favor this, sort of this set of policies as ones to work with. I also went through, just because I thought it may be relevant in the future, and just grabbed the last update date from each one of the policies, and then just did a little calculation here to say, what is the age of the policy? So, if we notice something here, here's an 11-year-old policy, maybe it's fine. But if, we see hold on destruction of records, and there's been something, big at the federal level happening, that might cause us to go, hold on a second, Shipman, are you sure we're not supposed to have anything new here with relation to this? There was something about government records and blah, blah, whatever. So it's a data point that could be useful to us in the future. And then I did add this notes column as well, because I noticed, as Chris mentioned, the regulations, and I thought, we should have a way of just tagging whether or not that, there's regs included, there's forms included. There's one, the pool safety one. I went through the whole thing, reviewed it, and then realized, wait, this whole thing is regulation. So, and then last but not least, I added this section over on the far left for each of us to just kind of tag the date that we reviewed the policies. And I originally was thinking of it as just like a checkbox, and we could just go like, yep, I reviewed it. Yep, I reviewed it. But I actually think there's utility in knowing, yes, I reviewed it, but also I reviewed it on this date. That could just help us to jog our memories. There are times when we're going to miss a meeting, because of Good Friday, or because of, one of these holidays, or just unavailable because of our other obligations. And, it can be difficult to sort of bridge that gap with your memory when you've, reviewed, 20 pages of policy to sort of jump into the conversation. If you have the date there, it can be useful. So,
John, I like the spreadsheet, and what I'm wondering about it is, because when I went through the policies, one of the things I did a lot of was tagging enumerated duties and obligations for different folks.
Yeah.
Does it make sense to have a column in here, or columns in here, that says duty, contains duty of superintendent or designee or finance director or whatever, and have checkboxes there, or basically to consolidate into one view as opposed to keeping a different document?
Maybe. I think, we could keep it in this same, not Excel, Google Sheet, and just create a new tab that's, the enumerated duties. I think we're going to need the sort of specifics. We're going to need to lift out of the policy, like here, it says that the super. So I think we need more than just this thing contains it. I think we'll need more. I think just the comments are probably going to be enough for now. And I would love to dive in on sort of the enumerated duties versus roles and responsibilities, and whether or not we can, sort of think about that tagging.
And one thing that we need to sort of be conscious of, and I haven't really figured out what the style of the Shipman policies is with this respect, but there are statutes that say the Board of Education shall, and often that's interpreted to mean that the administration can take up that obligation. So, the Board of Education shall ensure that everybody is trained on AEDs or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. That is almost always delegated down to administration, nursing staff, et cetera. Mm-hmm. What I don't know is the extent to which the Shipman policies use the Board of Education shall language exclusively where the board needs to do something, or whether it's used flexibly. Because I gathered reading it, there seemed to be several different drafters of the policies that we read, because the styles changed. And so getting a handle on what those expectations is when they use certain words is going to be helpful to us in understanding when there's an enumerated duty, whether it's really the board needs to take annual action to certify the AED, or we just need to make sure the administration is, covering that.
Right. Yeah, and we may not know the answer to that question until we're, a third of the way through or something, or a quarter of the way through, depending on how we chunk it up.
Right.
So any just general thoughts about the organizing principles of the spreadsheet? I mean, any concerns about sort of what we're doing here, or changes, edits, completely open to it.
Does
I
it
was
matter
just
to
kind of
you
adding
on
stuff as I
the,
thought was useful.
does it matter to you on the recommendations tab if there's a date associated with when the committee took action? I'm not sure it makes a difference, but
I don't think so. I try not to trust my imagination to all the different ways that there could be utility in these things, but I think we're safe in just that
But
being
you can also,
yes,
I guess,
no.
go back on the change history too.
Right. Yeah.
You really need to know.
That's one of the main benefits of working with this, is we can always go back and look at every change made by every person throughout.
Can you pull the drop down again for the recommendations?
Yep.
All right, I just wanted to see. Okay,
Oh, I
right.
see.
Yep. And it's the same here, right? So we both have that ability to choose on behalf of our committees what the recommendation is. Yes,
Would the
Kathy.
plan be, would the thought be that you've set up a tab for Easton policy, Reading policy index, and the Region 9 policy index? Is the thought that we each Easton, Reading, and Region 9 would work and make notes on their tab or on this overall tab?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, and this was the main takeaway that was just for me, is to create this Easton policy index and then see if we want to do that for Reading and Region 9, like if this process makes sense. So I went and I grabbed all of the policies that exist for Easton that's sort of currently on the website, which is a pain because each one is a separate PDF document and you have to download each one separately. There's no like, give me all the policies. Okay. So, they're all listed here. There are 240 different policies. So there's a massive difference. And some of them are just forms, right? You can see right here, like non-discrimination form, but it's mostly policy. And so I think what we were talking about last week is the idea that if we're going to make a decision about adopt, repeal, maintain, when we're looking at all of these just in a vacuum, as if they're the only things that ever existed, we could say, great, adopt, 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 adopt. But the options inside of Dr. McKinnon's rubric for repeal and maintain suggest a review of existing policy. So I think what that means is we have to individually, for each of our boards, go through our existing policy and understand the delta. Understand, like, for instance, non-discrimination. We know that there is also non-discrimination here in the shipment policy.
Mm-hmm.
That's really good. If we look at those two policies and we say they appear to be covering the same topics and referencing the same legal, making the same legal references, then we know we are looking at the sort of existing policy versus this policy. For Easton, I am not planning on going and doing that review for Reading nor Region 9. I think we're each going to have to look at our existing policy on our own because they can be different. And so at that point, I can make a decision about my recommendation is that we adopt the shipment policy, or let's say that we're looking at Title IX on this list. I may say, instead of adopt the shipment, I may say maintain, because we just did the Title IX. Now, that just because we just did it doesn't mean that it's any better than the shipment. We may say, it really does make sense to use the shipment policy. But through this rubric, that kind of dictates the work that's necessary. And so my goal with the sort of Easton policy index is to say, how hard is that process? The answer is it's kind of hard. It's right. Creating the view of all of these 85, 90, actually, there were more, 85 in here. And this is not including the sort of COVID policies. They had an entire sort of separate carve out just for COVID policies that was fairly extensive. So 85 policies compared against the 240 plus policies in the Easton book, it's a heavy lift. And just, I mean, literally just not even reading, not even reviewing the policies, just comparing. Okay, there's this one. Is the non-discrimination shipment actually the same, covering the same thing that's in the non-discrimination for Easton? That's a long way of saying we should all make sure that that's what we're agreeing to do. In the last iteration, when sort of in our previous work, we had agreed, look, we'll keep the recent stuff, but everything else is just repealed, right? So the assumption was repeal, as opposed to the assumption being review to decide to repeal. In the sort of previous iteration, we had said all policy repealed in favor of this new review that we're doing.
But John, that was done a policy at a time, right? So using Title IX as an example, or we just, you're talking about when we use CABE as a
correct.
framework.
We had made the assumption that all former policy was going to be put into the repeal bucket. When I'm talking about Title IX, or I'm talking about the anti-bullying policies, that was a special carve out for recent policies. So we're talking about 5-6 policies, probably at the most, that we're going to be put aside to say, well, we just looked at these, so we don't need to repeal these. But everything else, especially ones from 1997, like, okay, those go away, right? Like those, we're just going to assume repeal and just adopt the shipment standards. Sorry, and I said shipment right then when I meant CABE, when we were looking at CABE. That was the former posture. So I'm up for work. Like, I'm not afraid of doing the heavy lifting here. If we decide we want to go through policy by policy and decide, but it essentially means looking at all 85 here, which I would say is significantly easier than looking at the CABE policies. I flew through these 6 policies. It took me like 30 minutes to read. Like, it was great. Like, that would have taken a lot longer in the past. And especially if we land on that the regulations are not going to be a part of our review, I'll just go through, these 9 pages for the automatic external defibrillators. I'll just go remove everything that's not policy. And I think these numbers are actually going to go down. Oh, you know what I haven't done here? I have not summed the total pages, because that's a fun, nerdy thing to do. 772.
One, I guess, observation / question would be, so in the legacy policies, if you will, right? So Reading, Easton, Region 9, respectively, one would think, at some point those map to regulations. And so we're presuming that, okay, that's fine. Let's assume we'll go the route of repeal, right? Automatic repeal. In there, I'm presuming that there's some kind of history in each one that would links back to something that the board, the district, community, et cetera, wanted at that point in time, right?
Yep.
So there's some level of subjectivity in what we might want to include in this current iteration. Yeah. So how did we, just kind of learning from the last process that we went through the last couple of years, how did that enter that discussion and deliberation? And I guess to that, what does everybody feel about if we have elements like that we need to discuss?
Yeah, so we were working off of this sort of Frankenstein collection of policies. Each one of us had our own sort of different book that had been edited at different times in different ways, with different voices over time. And as we tried to update and sort of make those all work, it was maybe 3 months of discussions. And we just shook our head and said, this just doesn't work. And so we said, that's the point at which we said, let's move to this posture of just repeal.
I tend to think that the answer.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, John.
Well, so I'll be brief. As I looked at these policies, and I think, Cheryl, you're on to something really really poignant there. There are places where we may have a policy that was homegrown and really speaks to the sort of voice and sort of tone of our communities. And it seems wrong to just kind of, we're not even going to look at that. We're going to throw that out. So I would say there should be a phase of the process where there's a really sort of deep review, or, sort of a review of each one of the policies of our respective boards that we then bring to our boards to say, hey, our plan to update our policies is to repeal a large number of policies in order to align to the shipment model. In order to do that, we would be getting rid of all these policies. Allow me to highlight for you ones that I think there may be some, I don't know, controversy is not quite the word, but there may be some, sort of feelings around, hey, we actually want to keep that one. And to kind of give everyone an opportunity. It's almost like step one is we got to give everybody the opportunity to flag policies to save.
I'd be careful about framing it in the way you just framed it, because that's going to give rise to all kinds of sideways conversation.
Yeah.
What it sounds like you're looking to do here is say, all right, the shipment policies, are they acceptable or objectionable? And there's a sort of presumption that they're acceptable, and they're acceptable with what changes, if any. And then you sort of work through that. And then once you've done that, you go over to the index of the policies and you say, okay, I see that there's a news media policy that exists. We didn't talk about news media at all in the shipment policies. Let me go look at that and see if that's something that I care about or not, and decide to either surface it or not. And I think that step from a workflow perspective probably comes on a series basis. So we work through all the 1000 series, we approve all of the shipment 1000 series policies, then we crosswalk them all to say, okay, to resolve the 1000 issue, we are adopting these 8 policies, we are repealing these 13 policies, we're maintaining these 2 policies that are in neither bucket. Then we cast aside the 1000s entirely, move on to the 2000s. So it doesn't become an overwhelming behemoth, because otherwise you get lost in thousands of pages and nothing gets done.
Yeah, I think that's interesting.
Well,
And I think Jason's been trying to say something for a while.
Oh, go for it.
Yeah, I'm just, if you thought about this from like a computer engineering perspective, right? And we're trying to update the iPhone 5 here with new code, and kind of write the new code on an old platform. And I'd almost rather go to the new iPhone version of software with the new code, update the operating system, and then go back and look at, are there any policies that are missing? Almost reset, and then start looking at, well, do we need that policy on student materials? Or do we need that policy on advertising? And then you go back and you add, because if you try to write the new code based on the old way of doing something, then I think it's just, it may not be as economical. And then the other comment I have, John, is I also really like this spreadsheet, but the tab you're on right now are the shipment policies, right?
Correct.
So your option for the shipment policies from your drop down aren't really adopt, repeal, and maintain. It's really just adopt.
Yeah, that's right.
Adopt, reject, revise, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
And then when you go to your Easton policy, your Easton tab, that is where, don't you also need a drop down on your Easton?
Yes.
Okay. And then when
repeal,
you go
maintain.
Exactly.
Yep. And I love that. What I was envisioning, and I don't think this is the right way to go about it now, is that we would shuffle together the shipment and the Easton. We would tag it, so you'd be able to differentiate. This is a shipment, here's an Easton. This is a shipment, this is a region 9.
Single filterable list.
Exactly. Right. That was my plan. I don't think that's necessarily a good idea. At a minimum, we want to have a separate here, a separate here, a separate here, and not have to use filters for that. And so if we wanted to combine them together, I would just do that in a separate sheet and just sort of suck in the data from these sheets to do that. So that was the only reason that I think this existed in the first place like this. But you're right. I think it's essentially adopt, reject, revise. And then Easton is, repeal, maintain, maybe revise as well there. I know it's a mess, right?
Yeah, I would,
Right.
for the Eastern policies, for example, I think the two choices would be repeal, maintain.
Yeah.
And then if you maintained it, you could always review it later.
Right.
And this comes down to just human psychology,
Mm.
right? Like we always think, well, wait, we may need that. So I don't want to,
Oh
I
my-
don't want to
Yes.
do anything with that right now. And
So much.
And it's really, that's where we talked about last week, where we bring in Gwen Satoon from Shipman.
Yeah.
And she really helps us understand you don't need, 50% of these policies. You only need really the Shipman
Right.
policy. The Shipman policies are your foundation.
Right.
And you kind of reset the foundation, and then you get into what we might want. Because I mentioned that we got stuck on the Booster Club policy for weeks and weeks about whether we really need it, until we brought in Shipman and they explained, well, you don't need it. You can add it later if you want to.
Yeah.
But the reason why you don't need it is it actually makes you liable for something that you don't really need to manage.
Yeah. Okay.
I was, John, to the discussion last week, is this using this first 6 as sort of a test run to see how the process might work. I went in and started with the Shipman Policy Index and AEDs. And I went back kind of side by side and said, does Region 9 have an AED policy? I can't find one.
Right.
So and I don't know if this is opposite of what Dr. McKinnon just said, because I think that made a lot of sense, what he said. But I went in and I said, okay, there is no Region 9 AED policy. So in my view, the question is, well, we keep Shipman's or we decide we don't need one. But in my view, I would say adopt. We don't have one and we probably should. So then the second one, deadly weapons or firearms, Region 9 has 2 policies on that. So, and that's where I got a little bit, what is my role there? Because do we just wholesale say the Shipman policy supersedes the existing Region 9 2 policies? Or do we need, and I think that's what Dr. McKinnon, you were saying, that the Shipman policy is going to replace the 2 Region 9 existing policies on possession of deadly weapons or firearms, is versus try to make them fit and work with each other. Because when I looked at them side by side, Region 9 cited different statutes and things that weren't cited in the Shipman policies. And I'm assuming that the Shipman policies are correct, updated, and accurate.
Right.
So to the degree that we spin our wheels trying to align them perfectly, we cannot. I'm not qualified to do that, I guess, is my point.
Right.
And that the attorneys have created policies that cover us.
Yeah.
So short of something that really stands out as they just wasn't covered at all, maybe that's a flag to raise and discuss. But other than that, Shipman is good. That's where we're going. Is that the approach that everybody's comfortable with?
I'm not going back and looking at the existing policies in Reading, except in extraordinary circumstances, because I know that we have 3 different sets of policies on a lot of things across the 3 boards, and so it's not just merging 2; it's merging 4, and that creates a whole different Herculean task. With respect to AEDs, my expectation is because the statute was adopted in July of 2009 and effective in July of 2010, that Region 9 just never adopted the policy that relates to it. And has been acting without the policy that the statute more or less calls for.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
because then for example, number 3, I can't find a green cleaning program or anything
Right.
around that in Region 9. We don't have that in Region 9.
Well, that's a
Non-discrimination.
policy that on its face is not mandatory. The language
Right.
of shipment says you only do it if you are maintaining
Right.
a certain expectation of pest control.
Right.
So-
Only if you have a pest control program or something like they use that language. And if we
Well,
don't have one, then we don't need the policy.
Well, and green cleaning was actually set different from pesticide application.
Oh, you're right. No, you're right. Yeah, the pesticide one is the 4th one or 5th one.
Oh,
So-
yeah, my mistake. Sorry.
Yep.
We didn't have a pesticide application policy either, but so, and
Yeah.
it begs the question, do we, like to your point, do we need one or
Right,
not? We could, because in that case, we're actually adding now policies that we don't
Right.
don't currently have.
Right. And the question is, if the policy only needs to be added if you have a program, for question number 1, do we have the program? No? Great, then we don't need the policy. We could ask a side question, should we have that a program? Is there utility in having the program? But for AEDs, it seems like we absolutely should have that policy. It doesn't exist. In mine, the only place where I found defibrillators was in a do not resuscitate policy,
Mhm.
which I'm like, wait, are we supposed to have a do not resuscitate policy? Like, does that introduce liability? I can't imagine any other topic introducing more liability. So, yeah.
Rather than sort of address these collaterally, do you want to just start walking through them and discussing what we found?
But Sarah, I think, has been trying to get in as well.
I just wanted to see if you can filter for us, John,
Mhm.
based on the last update date,
Yes.
the oldest.
Yeah.
If we can see what that total is, I would tend to say, let's look at those dates and push those through right away.
So bear with me 1 second. I'm just trying to switch my view here and it's not working. There. All right. So yes, I can. The one tricky part about doing this by date is then we're cutting across series, and there is utility in sort of reading about and discussing on a theme, right? On the sort of theme of community and board operations, as opposed to going from board operations to personnel to business to administration based on date. But I think, that's why I thought the last update would be useful as well. Is like, is there something we're finding in common with these, more recent policies? What I would say is, after I had finished putting all the dates in here, I noticed there were a ton of 1s and 0s, which is really good. You're an outlier at a 5 or an 11. If we just said filter based on, let's create a little smart filter here. So I'm using filter views, not filters, so that you can access this, but it doesn't change your view automatically. And I'm going to call this kindergarten policies. Okay. So these are policies that are 5 years or older. Okay. And we're going to say by condition is greater than or equal to 5. Okay. So, right, of the 85, there's 7. Everything else is newer than that, which is, like that alone, I would have said, let's go with Shipman, right? Because we would not have that same result if we did this for Gabe. Cool.
So ultimately, is the process potentially that we each go back and look at our individual policy handbook? I mean, we go back and answer these questions for ourselves, for our district. And then is there a way to merge those 3 sheets and say, okay, well, everybody said repeal, everybody said adopt, and then we would know everybody's in agreement with those policies, and then we could go back and discuss the ones where somebody might have said adopt and somebody else said repeal, and have a smaller number of policies that we actually have to sort out among the 3 people to get to a consistent book.
What I think, and Dr. McKinnon, tell me if this is in line with what you were saying earlier. I think the answer is we review the shipment policies, and I really like the idea of reviewing them sort of series by series, or in collections of pages. So let's say it's the entire 1000 series, and then the next chunk is 2000 and 3000, and then the next chunk is 4000, then 5000, and then 6000, right? So it ends up being sort of 5 tranches that we review, and just 2 and 3 go together. If we review all of those and we say nothing objectionable here, we don't need the pesticide one because we don't have a plan, everything else we say we want to adopt, then we each look within our existing policies to flag the sort of ones that would not be repealed as a part of adopting these guys, the sort of deltas, like what is the collection of policies that exist outside of those. And I think we have to flag those for some kind of future review. I think what Dr. McKinnon is suggesting is that future review is adopt the 1000 series, adopt the 2000, adopt all the shipment, and then come back afterwards to say, all right, which of the old policies do we need to revive?
It's about a psychological burden shift.
Yeah.
The burden of keeping something is lower than the burden of creating something. And so, to Dr. McKinnon's point, if you wipe it all off the table, then you have the burden of proving why you need the video game policy again,
Right.
as opposed to just keeping it because we've always had it.
Right.
Yeah, so I'll just chime in and say I've spent a fair amount of time trying to look at the mapping between policies, and it is tedious, but also fairly complex. So I'm voicing my support for the concept of beginning with the end in mind, right? So let's begin with looking at the most current updated, and then plan backwards to see, are there any legacy policies that we need to keep? Because if we begin with what we currently have, you will find a lot of redundancy. There continues to be redundancy, even with our most current policies. We'll use the climate and bullying one as an example. There are aspects of that current policy that still exist in legacy policies that are on our books. So if we begin with what's most current and then assume that it is including a number of other policies on the same topic, and then look only for those ones that really are not addressed at all, and consider whether they are necessary, perhaps getting some legal opinion on that, and then move forward. Because I think planning from what we currently have will just be so incredibly time consuming, especially because, as you know, they're not the same across the 3 districts. So Kathy, what you noticed is really the result of many, many years of not having enough time and momentum around policy review in Region 9. So you'll find a number of policies that exist in Easton and Reading that don't exist in Region 9. There are a few policies that are unique to the high school, and so we might find them only in Region 9. But that's more the exception than the rule.
I think Stephanie's absolutely right. And I think something like, as an example, the policy on non-discrimination, we should adopt the shipment policy on non-discrimination and assume that any existing policy in any of the 3 districts that touches on discrimination at all is repealed and not touched as a result of putting this policy into place. Only to the extent that there is a subject matter on the books now that is not covered by shipment, should we talk about whether or not we want to rehabilitate that as part of this process? And I think those are going to be the exceptions and not the rule. And we've got to avoid drilling in and saying, oh, I like this paragraph in the existing smoking policy. Can we bring that paragraph into the shipment policy?
Right.
Because we'll be here until 2037 trying to do that.
Yeah, that's true.
What,
So- Go ahead,
just-
Jason.
just when we once we got the understanding from Shipman about the idea behind, absolutely needing policies required by law versus policies that you've had in the past that you don't need. Once we kind of crossed that bridge of understanding, we essentially said, we're going to meet again in a month's time, and your homework between now and in 4 weeks is to essentially go through the shipment policies and identify, are there any reasons why you would not adopt all of these policies? And then we also went through our own current policies, which were CABE, and we did the same thing. Are there any reasons why we would not repeal any of these policies? We've kind of the mindset that we are going to either repeal or maintain, right?
Yeah.
And you needed that block of time in order to really read the policies. So we never read them. We never did the work the way we are talking about them now together. You did this almost like homework, right? And what I love about John's workspace is that you have a record of having completed that homework, right? So you've signed off here that you've read these policies on such and such date, and you can click what your recommendation is. And then you come back in, we all come back in 4 weeks with our homework completed, and we're only talking about 5% or 10% of this list. We wouldn't be able to do that unless you had this tool, John,
to coordinate. Yeah,
Right.
and what I would argue, I think there's a lot of utility in us being able to sort of check in with each other and talk about the enumerated duties and the way regulations, not regulations, or hey, I noticed this here. Any thoughts? And to sort of discuss this and to do it in a sort of public forum, I think there's utility for the community. So I like the sort of weekly meeting, but if we could, like, we've always had homework, right? We were doing 60 pages at a time in the past. I think these 6 policies equate to like 34 pages. If we agree that we're not going to include a review of regulation and just the policy stuff, I think this gets even smaller. I would bet that in a week's time, we could all pretty easily read through. I'm just looking at the numbers here. Purchasing is beefy, but everything else, I bet we could easily get through down to business by next Friday. Right. And even purchasing, I wouldn't be surprised to find a ton of forms and regulation there that if removed, then it's shorter. So, what you're talking about, yes, homework, right? But the homework is, sort of week by week, and we can check in and kind of ask questions and talk about our recommendations and say, are we moving along together? Are we in agreement that this, we haven't found anything objectionable here and we're comfortable adopting? Does that make sense?
Yes, I do. I think there is, to Dr. McKinnon's point, a psychological component here, and there is a leap. You have to take a leap of faith to focus on the shipment policy without a side-by-side comparison. And I think it sounds like it makes a lot of sense. You've done it. It worked well. And, but there is a psychological leap of faith here.
Yeah.
So I guess just a logistical question. I noticed I think Chris and John, you had actually started making notes on the shipment policy forms. And John, I apologize. I accidentally deleted or accepted one of your changes and it disappeared, and I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
But so is the thought that from a logistic standpoint, we would all use that edit tool to make our comments, questions, anything right there?
Yes.
And then the spreadsheet, the notes section is not where we would put questions.
No.
That's more it's 4 pages or it's
logistically, just kind of logistical, like, hey, just so everybody notices, here's something to know about this. And I would say a comment like this, nobody else needs to react to that comment. It's really sort of first person to comment, gets to sort of make that comment. You could put in here, actually, I believe something else, without saying, without getting into a debate, just say, something for discussion, like, want to discuss this. But I think the intent is the comments that we make here should not be any kind of illegal online meeting. It is simply flagging, here's something we talk about, here's something we talk about, here's something we talk about. So these comments that Chris made, comments that I made here, the intent was during this discussion today, we would sort of review these, and we wouldn't accept these because that comes after we've added things to the enumerated duties and things like that. And I think there's a way for me to recover the comments that have been cleared. So fret not.
A couple of comments, just to Kathy's point about the leap of faith. I think Stephanie, John, and I have a slightly different perspective, in as much as 2.5 years ago, we were in basically your headspace, which was, how do I reconcile this and make sure I'm doing a good job and not like throwing away the baby with the bathwater on all of this? And we agonized over it for a while before coming up with a certain set of principles that guided that work, that were, keep it simple at all costs, focus on legal compliance at all costs, take out aspirational language, default to the CABE policy manual as being the gold standard for right now, and have it supersede everything that exists. And we're kind of going through that same process again now of sort of coming to grips with the idea that we're throwing out everything. The difference, I think, from my perspective, is that before we were throwing out more or less CABE for CABE, and now we're throwing out CABE for shipment, which results in psychologically a reduction of stuff. And when you feel like you're married to stuff, you feel like maybe you're not doing the right thing by gutting things. And that's where we're sort of having to come around on how we address this. With respect to the comments, I followed this, and I think John probably did too, the methodology that we had been using in the past, which was you drop comments when you have questions or confusion or you want to discuss something. And then at these meetings, when we open a policy, we would only discuss the comments, basically, because the assumption was if there wasn't a comment, everybody was fine with the language.
Right. So that was the way that we had done the homework in the past, and we were doing roughly 60 pages a week. And it was, here's the 60 pages that we're going to review this week. And then we'd show up the next week and, sort of just go through the comments. That ended up being the sweet spot. I suspect that we're going to be able to do a lot more than 60 pages because the shipment policy is just cleaner. And sort of easier to get through. You would spend a lot of time in the CABE policy going, wait, what? And in some cases, it really just didn't make sense. And you'd have to reword, and that just is very time consuming.
Excuse me.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, so the regulations, there's regulations and forms, there's other documents that are not policy. Is the plan that those will be set aside until the policy work is done?
I hope so.
Should we not read those or address them at this point?
I hope so. I hope that we can come to agreement on that. I think if we were publishing this as a policy manual, I don't know if we need the regulations to be included in that policy manual.
Yeah, it would be my preference to delegate the promulgation of regulations to the administration.
That's the way it's supposed to be, right?
Dr. McKinnon, is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. So I can go through, well, we do one of two things. I can just leave the documents as is, which I think there's a benefit to that because right now they 1-for-1 match what's on shipments in shipments world. But we can all just know that when we get down, when we scroll, and we get to something that says regulations, no need to comment, no need to continue reading. Like, it's just the policy that we're responsible for. So does that seem reasonable? And I can go through and recalculate the page counts so that it's just sort of the policy portion of the pages, because that'll help us to assess. Because if this is 51 pages, but it's only 5 pages of policy and the rest is all forms and regulations, that gives us a better sense of whether or not we're going to be able to get through to the 4,000 series in a week or whatever. Yeah.
Makes sense to me.
Okay. So I have a hard stop at 10 o'clock, but I actually would like to make sure that we're walking away with a really clear idea of next steps. Does it seem reasonable that we're going to try to sort of show up next Friday, having done a fair amount of homework that is reviewing of shipment policy?
Do you want to set the number of pages now, or do you want to email us after you've gone through? No?
Let's go. And I see Dr. McKinnon just came into this document too. So I wanted to check this 50 pager. That's awesome. I'm just going to do a search for regulation.
It's 10 pages.
That's great.
I think the policy ends at 9.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the rest is, well, appendixes. What do we need to do with appendixes? Anything?
We didn't touch regulations and appendices. We left them there as kind of guiding documents, and would go back and look at them later.
Yeah, these are all legal references.
Right.
Oh, right out of the code of regulations.
Yeah. I don't plan to do any edits or comments on legal citation. Yeah. Okay. So that's that's
actually, note there is an alternate purchasing policy that starts on page 27 that is specifically for regional boards of education. So this might be its own complex conversation that we might not be able to get to next week, because we're going to want to compare them and see where the differences are, and to the extent we need to adopt different policies.
Right. And especially if we can all just adopt the regional one, then great, let's use that. But that's going to take a little bit of discussion. Okay. So do we want to try to just get through everything up to purchasing, not through purchasing? So basically down here to idea, fiscal compliance. And then we'll loop back through the 6 that so if anybody has notes or discussion items on those, that we can talk about that homework next week.
And the expectation would be that we work through whatever comments people have on each of them and come to a consensus that we are approving or not approving them.
Right.
So
John, does Region 9 have access to this Google Sheet yet? I don't believe I've been able to access it.
It should be. Yep. You should have access here, and you should be able to get to it. I shared a folder, just policy committee documents. So the whole folder and everything I put in that folder, everyone here should have access to. So if you just look for policy committee documents, and I'll send you. You found it? Okay.
I'm on it. Yep.
And you can favorite folders, right? So then this will be at the top of your list. And this is the policy review 2022 is the name of the file.
John, so I have an idea.
Sure.
When you're in the shipment policy tab, and right now you've got under recommendations, you've got those 3 options, right? Adopt, repeal.
Yeah, and I'll update those per our conversation today.
Okay. I'm wondering, when in the review section for each of you over there, can you have instead of just putting the date, right?
Yeah.
Can you add a drop down that says adopt or more questions, or adopt or table or something? So because I don't think you need the date, right? Obviously the date's going to be recorded for what decision you're making.
Yeah, I think that's right. So it could just be, instead of reviewed, it could just be recommendation. And essentially each one of us is sort of making our selection of, so what our recommendation is on that
I am a
policy.
little queasy about
Uh,
proto voting on a spreadsheet.
Yeah,
that's a
what
really
I was
good
gonna,
point.
I was gonna.
That's a really
ask
good
that
point.
question.
Maybe
Yeah.
change it, maybe change the language, maybe change it from adopt then to this looks good, or thumbs up, or
I think we're still on the border of illegal online meeting where we're
okay,
pre-voting.
then
But
What if we do like a date, right? Keep like a drop down with a date and then discussion, right? Because discussion implies that we're going to take this to the meeting and people have whatever questions they're going to have. And
Comments or
and
no
say-
comments? It's really
I think
Yeah.
I think just to be FOIA compliant and for this not to become an online meeting, I think if we tag that this is the row where we're stopping at for discussion on 318, that
Yeah.
during that meeting, we are going through and choosing adopt or reject.
And once we get going, it's going to be very efficient. It's just a
And
matter
it's
of
going to be boom, 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 right? And
train out of the
I-
station.
yeah, I think that's right. Because I was thinking the same thing, Jason, like, oh, what would be really cool is if we each had our own little like approved box, but
yeah, no, I understand. It doesn't need to be approved, but it would be nice if you could visually see where everyone is on that page.
I just think that
It's-
we run afoul of FOIA there, because that becomes an online meeting where we're actually testing our
It
opinions
will
on
be
these things.
abundantly clear when we go through the process, and it will move more quickly than this discussion about how to document things.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Clarifying question, John, on the individual tabs. I know we're defaulting to shipping policies, but
Yeah.
we still need to crosswalk which of among the three boards those individual policies. So is part of the weekly homework assignment for each subgroup to take, to update a tracker?
I wouldn't say for next week. I think let's talk more about that next week.
Okay.
But I think we have to dive in a little bit more. I think I've come to the point of I accept the premise that we are essentially dismissing previous policy, and then we can go through and flag what are the things we might want to revive after we've adopted all the shipment stuff. I think the recommendations are correct on that.
Though to Cheryl's question, it might be helpful just to say, no Region 9 policy, like it doesn't exist. Because that just takes a few minutes to cross-reference, is that policy in place? And that gives us at least a starting point as to it doesn't even exist. Just a simple.
And we can do that on the right, though, under the notes section, correct? Is that?
Yes, we could.
So we
So
could
then,
say for AED, no Region 9 policy no current Region 9 policy, or would you prefer that to be on our Region 9 page sheet?
That gets more tricky, because then we have to like duplicate this list over on the Region 9 list. So I think maybe instead of the notes, we add, I can just add a column for, sort of a checkbox in Easton, in Reading, in Region 9, and then we can sort of go through, and then we'll have that inventory really easily sort of accessible to say, hey, this is net new, or this is existing. So I'll introduce that to the spreadsheet. I got to jump for another for work obligation. Do we feel like we have a good path for next week?
Yes, thank you, John, for setting up all these spreadsheets and all getting everything loaded. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
And do you feel like you need anyone from shipment, or a kind of an overview, a discussion?
I think if next week we're revisiting, or if we come to a consensus on our sort of posture towards reject all the old ones and sort of put them on the shelf and then just revive ones on an ad hoc basis, if we all agree with that, then I don't think there's an issue. If we don't, then maybe we bring in somebody from shipment to make the case. but I also don't want to bully anybody who feels like, hold on, I think there's a really good reason not to go with that approach. So
I think it would be helpful to have Shipman speak to the committees, the policy committees, in advance of the committees going to the boards,
Okay,
Oh,
good.
just so we can ground ourselves and be able to articulate this to our colleagues.
Okay, all right. All right, thank you.
okay, so that takes us to committee member comment. Good. And do I have a motion to adjourn for joint policy? Thank you, Chris. No objection. We're joint policy is adjourned at 10:02.
Move for
I have a
Region
motion
9.
Second. At 10:02.